mynews.studio.
Imagine this. In Malawi, a girl steps out of the tobacco fields and into a classroom. Her family's income takes a hit, but suddenly her future looks very different. Is ending child labor really as straightforward as getting kids into school?
Today's date is December 15th, 2025. The data is striking. Since 2020, there are 20 million fewer children working around the world. That's the steepest decline we've seen in decades. But what's actually making this happen?
It's not just one factor. Countries everywhere are rethinking policies on education and children's rights. Take Malawi. When they removed public secondary school fees, everything shifted. Families who used to rely on their children's earnings to cover school costs could finally keep their kids in class.
That's a significant shift. I read the latest report from the International Labor Organization and UNICEF. They actually tie the drop in child labor directly to these kinds of policy moves. Is Malawi an exception, or is this happening elsewhere too?
It's definitely happening elsewhere. Vietnam, for example, now offers free education from preschool through secondary school. For families that used to need their kids to work part-time, it's a game changer. Full-time school becomes possible. Plus, free meals and textbooks help lower the costs even more.
And it's not limited to education. Brazil rolled out the first comprehensive online child rights law in Latin America. How does that connect to reducing child labor exactly?
The law is actually quite important. It requires digital platforms to remove exploitative content and lets young influencers walk away from abusive contracts without having to leave school behind. It addresses a whole new side of child protection, especially as more kids earn income online.
There's another piece to this: corporal punishment. Thailand, Czechia, and Switzerland recently joined more than 70 countries in banning all forms of physical punishment of children. Does that tie into child labor issues at all?
Indirectly, yes. Banning corporal punishment is part of a broader effort to recognize children's rights and dignity. When laws protecting children are stronger, there's usually better enforcement of child labor regulations and more kids stay in school.
The report actually shares individual stories. In Malawi, for instance, rights groups followed families as they made decisions. One 14-year-old said her parents could finally send her to school instead of needing her tobacco field wages. What kind of ripple effects does that have?
It really shifts how families set priorities. When education becomes affordable, parents are more likely to choose school over work, especially for girls, who are often the first to be pulled into labor.
But what about the areas still struggling the most? Sub-Saharan Africa has 2/3 of all child laborers. Are we seeing any movement there?
Progress is slower there, mostly because of poverty, conflict, and fast-growing populations. It's tough to regulate informal farming and family-run work. Still, there are some promising steps: conditional cash transfers, scholarships for girls, even mobile schools for remote places.
Conditional cash transfers. How do those work? Are they really keeping kids out of labor?
They are. Families receive money only if their children attend school. UNICEF's found that boys are leaving dangerous mines and girls are moving away from domestic work because these programs make staying in school the better financial choice.
Technology's playing a role too. You mentioned Brazil's law for online exploitation, but there's also data tracking. How is that changing things?
Data lets governments and organizations spot problems early and act faster. For example, community committees can use mobile tools to report child labor cases that might otherwise slip under the radar, especially in rural areas.
International groups like the ILO and UNICEF seem to be at the center of this. Are they mostly funding these programs, or is their role something else?
Their main work is actually providing data, technical advice, and helping governments build capacity. They assist with drafting new laws, training inspectors, designing social programs, and pushing for international financing and commitments.
So, what are the hardest barriers left? If we've seen this much progress, what's keeping us from ending child labor for good?
The main ones are poverty, weak law enforcement, and traditional beliefs that see child labor as necessary. Some places simply lack enough schools or teachers, and when economies falter, families sometimes go back to relying on child work.
Are there any new approaches being tested?
Integrated programs show promise, like combining free school policies with support for parents who lose income when their children stop working. Community learning centers and technology-based monitoring are also growing.
This is more than just statistics. It's changing individual lives. What's the bigger picture here?
When fewer children are forced to work, more go to school. That reduces poverty and leads to healthier, more stable societies. The effects last: better jobs, stronger economies, more resilient communities.
It really is a rare example of global progress. Could this approach work as a model for other countries?
Yes, the takeaway is that coordinated changes, like removing fees, making laws stronger, and supporting families, are effective. Other countries facing similar challenges can adapt these ideas.
We started with that girl in Malawi stepping into a classroom. Multiply that by 20 million, and you get a sense of what's possible.
That's the story. Big numbers, but real people and real change.
Thanks for listening. This episode was brought to you by mynews.studio. You can try it now for free.